Once upon a time, there was a Chinese farmer who lost a horse, ran away. And all the neighbors came around that evening and said, "That's too bad." And he said, "Maybe." The next day, the horse came back and brought 7 wild horses with it. And all the neighbors came around and said, "Why, that's great, isn't it?" And he said, "Maybe." The next day, his son was attempting to tame one of these horses and was riding it and was thrown and broke his leg. And all the neighbors came round in the evening and said, "Well, that's too bad, isn't it?" And the farmer said, "Maybe." And the next day, the conscription officers came around looking for people for the army, and they rejected his son because he had a broken leg. And all the neighbors came round that evening and said, "Isn't that wonderful?" And he said, "Maybe."
So you brought this up. We started talking about this.
Frame it. This is a frame problem.
I was going to say, this is the frame problem. You brought it up as the frame problem. And so Paul Vanderklay is talking about the different frames that we have. And when you realize that you're bringing sort of assumptions and stuff to the world as you perceive it,
and think about it.
Then you're always within sort of this frame, sort of everything's framed by your own, whatever, your own consciousness somehow. And this is a problem because, well, why is it a problem?
Well, when Luke said think about it, I think that's really important, because to me, that's when Adam and Eve see their nakedness, right? That's the casting down of the eyes. That's what that is. And the lack of transcendence, because that's what happens that's the actual movement when Adam and Eve fall into multiplicity, right? Mm-hmm. Like, imagine this is like Douglas Harding's, toddler to teenager thing, right? Where the toddler doesn't know who he is. He's not looking at his multiplicity, right? He's just, the parents put him in the mirror and say, "Look, that's you, Bobby." And he goes, "Okay," just to make his parents happy, right? But then suddenly the teenager sees themselves in the mirror, and that's that same downcasting of the eyes, right? And Douglas Harding says, that's when you think you are what you look like, and what you look like is dying, right? So you're not seeing anything sacred. You're not seeing anything eternal. You're not seeing anything transcendent. You're just seeing this material body that's looking at you through, that you're looking at through your eyes. And I think everyone has that sense that when they look in a mirror, they're looking at something, not with it.
Like
right?
an object, yeah.
Right. And so that's
and the transcendent the transcendent's going to be that which is just outside the frame.
Well, and this reminds me of Shari, when you were talking about, because something that comes up all the time is your, your First Nations look around thing. But when you were talking about that one day peripheral vision, and when you look up, it activates like the pineal gland in your third eye. Like, remember, like that's when you look up, when you're not just like this inward myopic focus and you look up, you're simultaneously looking at something, but you're also not seeing other things in your periphery. You're seeing the thing you're looking at, but you're also seeing everything else. And it's that's when you're actually looking.
Yeah. It's an awareness of everything around you. And I'm trying to remember exactly how I phrased it this morning, but there's, there's a unity in God, right? God is everything, filling all things. And And then there's this multiplicity below, but it is also unified in the sense that it's connected. Like if you think about Indra's net is this net. It's a web of a net, and there are these little jewels, right? And they're where the net converges, right? All those points. And you could think of them in this case as human beings, for example. And all those little gems could think that they're the only gem on the net. But when they look around, right, then they start to see that they're actually connected to all the other gems on the net.
Yeah, what was that? So Peugeot was talking to James Lindsay and Benjamin Boyce last night. Who cares, phone? And he was talking, just ignore it. No one cares. No one that matters has my number. I just want to bring up that triangle. Do you guys know what that triangle is, of all the interconnecting triangles? It reminds me of when Almond Tree Jason was talking about, you guys remember when he was talking about the Star of David and the triangles? Yeah. It's like that, but there's a triangle and there's some name for it. James Lindsay brought it up. It's a triangle composed of other triangles, and it's a fractal pattern. But that reminds me also of the net. It's all these connecting patterns. And another way to think of these things that I really like, that I would like to riff on with you guys, is we were talking about this morning with Chad, because he made his new video I thought was really good, and he connected a couple clips. It was Peugeot talking with Brett Weinstein, and then some Jordan Peterson clip, and they were talking about perception essentially, and Peugeot was trying to talk about faith, and I nuanced or modified a little bit what Peugeot was talking about, because I think it's all faith. Peugeot was essentially saying anytime you level up, so anytime you go from analysis of the things that you know and see, the multiplicity, he said anytime you level up and you have the correspondent unity of the whatever thing you're seeing, he said that's faith, because that level up is a level that you can't see and name. It's essentially mystical. Like, this is why I say, like, everyone is mystical, whether or not they know it, because that is the unnamed thing that is the matrix or the womb or the unification behind anything that you're talking about. And but all of that is faith, and that's kind of what Nate said, I think, in one of the meditations of the Tarot talk, when he was just like, your imagination is that organ that perceives the essences, the unity of a thing, but it's inarticulable, because anytime you name it, you fall into the multiplicity. Whenever you name it, you're back into it.
That's you grabbing onto it, so that you can comprehend is the same as apprehend, right? Yeah. So and you have to, otherwise it doesn't exist, right? Like, try to name an animal that, or describe an animal that has no name. You can't. Your first question is, well, what one? Because you want to name it, right?
Right. Well, and this even gets into weird Trinitarian theology. This is why Nate and I have talked about God being beyond being, because God, the Father, is that ineffable thing that is the same as nothingness, that's beyond being, because he's unnameable. You can't name him. You only name him in Christ, but then that is the manifest name.
But what if nothingness is actually everything?
Well, it is.
Right. Because it can't be named, right? Because there's too much of it. That's the thing.
Yeah, and that gets into like the non-duality thing, which contains duality, because it's day and night, but those two halves are part of a whole, which is like a day, but then you can keep leveling up. The day is part of something bigger and something bigger and something bigger, until you get to the unnameable thing that is beyond all things. Which is what happens when children ask you why over and over. Yeah, that's that fractal tunnel that you end up falling, or mine shaft or whatever. It feels like a mine shaft when it's a 3-year-old, and you're just like, I can't, and then you finally get to the thing that you can't name, right? At the bottom of it. I wanted to get back to, like Jess said, how do you get out of the frame problem? Yeah.
Right. And I think it's just as simple as wishing upon a star, if I want to steal one of Jordan Peterson's things, right? This is why he emphasizes this. And I'm surprised that Paul hasn't picked up on that, because that's the lifting of the downcast eyes, right? Off of the multiplicity and onto the unity, the thing. It's not just a wish. It's a faith. That is that leap, right? Where you go from that which is below to that which is above. That's what you're doing in that movement. And then your vision, your field of vision is expanded to everything around it, right? So everything opens up to you, and you're faced with nothing but potential. And perhaps that's why you can wish, right? Because a wish is something that you're pulling out of the potential. That's what you're doing. It represents, like when you make a wish, someone will say to you, here, make a wish, throw this penny in the fountain and make a wish. You can think of anything, right? This is the one time in your whole life where you can just say the dumbest thing. It's all there.
Because a wish is almost
it's infinite,
free of constraint.
Right.
It's like just pretend.
Right, but that is the transcendent, right? Because it is the nothing that is everything.
Yeah. And that's kind of where imagination plays. This is why imagination is probably so important, because that's what dreaming is. I mean, even, to dream, it's to enter that place that is beyond your comprehension, Mm-hmm. And I think it's the wishing on a star. What's great is you wish for the heavenly, for the things above you, but then that also just will then in turn permeate all the lower things. Cause that's what I was trying to say to Chad this morning.
Right.
Like, even this is where I'd push on Peugeot and say, like, even the naming of the multiplicity and the thinking of the multiplicity is still faith. Cause the fact is, to quote George MacDonald, that no man understands anything. Like, we don't know what any of this stuff is either, just because we name it. Like, you say chair, you don't know what the hell that is. Like, you can keep going down the fractal levels. Like, you can break it apart into lower and lower and lower and lower multiplicities. But when you get all the way to the bottom of that, where you can't go any lower, quarks, leptons, uptons, but whatever, like, you don't know what the hell that is. It's just something you call it. You don't know what matter is. You don't know what anything is. We just think we do. It's this ego game that we're playing.
Yeah.
So
there was I had a thought. Yeah, what I wanted to throw out there was, how does what we're talking about matter in the world? Like, when you're moving around with people that you love, how does this matter?
Judgment. This is where I want to take it.
Right.
Judgment and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. We've been talking about that lately, and I think this is why it's really so important, because it gets into, I think so the full quote, that George MacDonald quote that I love so much, is the fact is no man understands anything when he understands that fact, mm-hmm. That is his first tottering step, not towards understanding, but towards the capacity of one day understanding. And I think why it's important is, like, this gets into what you were talking about yesterday, humility and courage.
Yeah.
To walk on the water, and also to walk on the water, but simultaneously to get out of the place of judgment of your brother and yourself, so that you can actually live. Because I'm of the belief that when you're in this mode of being, of analysis and thinking that you understand things, and when you're stuck in the duality, the binary of the duality, and you can't see outside of that, like, you have no periphery, third eye stuff going on, nothing that can transcend your analysis, you will be stuck in a hell of judgment, both of yourself and of other things and of all sorts of stuff.
Even little things. Like, what comes to my mind right now is Jesus sleeping in the boat and the
Yeah.
storm is raging. Okay. This is a man he's not judging anything. He's just sleeping. And then they wake him up in a panic. Because why? Because what's happening to them is bad. Okay. They made a judgment on it.
Yeah.
It's scary. It's bad. Okay. And Jesus says, what's your problem? It's neither, right? It isn't anything. It just is, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I think that's why he says that, because how do I put this? No matter the outcome, everything is going to be what it's going to be, right?
Yeah.
Because there is a telos, and so, in this case, I want to kind of just keep it to a simple case of judgment, not a judgment on a person or a judgment on an idea necessarily, but just a judgment on a situation where someone is judging it to be bad. Of course, we do that, and we need to do that to act. Okay, we need the capacity to act, and we're able to do that by judging something, right? Is that ice thin? Is it going to hold my weight? Is this and that going to happen? Yeah. But ultimately, if you get the 30,000 foot view, even if the ice is thin and you think it's thick and you go through it, the end game is it's gonna wrap that whole thing up in its unity, right? This is the undergirding or the Geborgenheit of God.
And that's unnameable and inarticulable and beyond your comprehension, which gets into Job stuff. So this is where and that's faith to me. Ultimately, it's this idea that God is good, but it's not a good that can even be named, because it might look real bad.
Right. Like that's why I said yesterday, if Sam Harris was to ask me why I think God is good,
right,
when he makes his list of horrific events, I wouldn't be able to answer him in a way that he would want me to. Okay?
Yeah.
He wouldn't. It's not that he couldn't understand it. And I think this is also important. Like I mentioned also yesterday, that I've seen people wander off into the landscape of pain and suffering as Christians and just turn back. They don't want to go there. They're like, no, I can't explain it, so I'm not going to talk about it. But it's not that they couldn't go there. They could walk out into that landscape. They won't.
Yeah.
That's the problem. And I think Job did. He walked right out into the landscape of pain and suffering, right? Jess, would you agree with that?
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. He walked around, he looked around, he picked it up, he felt it, and he kept coming back to the same conclusion that he was righteous.
And he said what he thought.
Right, which was that. Right? That he was he was not in the wrong. So essentially, he wasn't going to make a judgment. He wasn't going to call it anything. He wasn't going to call it good. He wasn't going to call it bad. And then when he asked God for an answer, he didn't get that answer. He didn't get the judgment answer.
Right.
He got the unity answer. That's what he got. He got the whole picture. And somehow I think he saw himself in that, right? He saw himself in the whole, the function that he has. And that gave him a reason to live.
Yeah, well, I want to see what Jess says, because this goes into areas where most Christians, especially conservative type Christians, dare not tread, because it gets into this duality, good and evil, and all of this being even within creation and within God, however you want to mess with it. Because we've been talking too, Jacob's been talking about this on his server lately, of like, I am the Lord your God, I create raw, chaos.
Right.
And yes, you've been really meditating on that and contemplating that dynamic.
Yeah, and I mean, as far as like the unity of all things, it's also how we view that. Is it a unity that's good or not?
Yeah, right.
And I think that there's a way in which a lot of people think that there's something fundamentally not good in the whole unity of things, and that they've got to protect themselves from it, that they've got to, it's the, cowering and turning your head down, because what's out there, what is in the transcendent, it's all nothing good can happen out there.
Whatever I can't see it's got to be bad.
Right. And all you need is a couple bad experiences to just confirm that for you. Just be like, well, that I can say this happened and this happened and this happened. Therefore, there's no ultimate good. The good is within the small little world that I can sort of frame and control. So people, but this is a reciprocal narrowing. This is something that just gets smaller and smaller and smaller. God's speech at the end of Job is simultaneously like terrible, overwhelming, and like speaking of a good that is beyond description. Like it's all those things at once. And God doesn't judge Job for his sort of reaction. So Job, first kind of laments and wants to be uncreated. He's like, there was no reason for my life. And then he kind of has this case against God. He's like, I've been dealt with unjustly. I'm innocent. And I don't, there's people that want to point out, be like, well, Job was wrong. Like, yeah. But that's not the point. and God doesn't even condemn Job for that, because there's something like, when we're going through that, we're going to react in the ways that we do.
Sure.
And he actually condemns the friends, which are actually trying to defend God, which is, and
also assert his unrighteousness.
Right, and condemn Job.
Impose that on him.
It's everybody's here you go. That's the frame problem, is everybody's trying to frame it.
Yeah, and that's the thing is like when the transcendent breaks in on you, I think there's two fundamental ways that this happens to everyone that's unescapable. One is tragedy, and then one is just awe and wonder. And so those are kind of the two ends of the positive and negative emotion.
Well, and often, so what this is reminding me of, often those are the same things. Like, do you guys remember when Jordan Peterson was talking about people? And this is a matter, it is a matter of perspective and time and maturity and all that stuff, though, is he would say often some of the most tragic things that have happened to people in their life, in the moment, they hate. And they think this is a terrible thing. Their judgment is like, this is bad. And then down the road, 5, 10, 20, 30 years, their assessment and judgment then is, this is the best thing that's ever happened to me. This is why, is why I've been thinking about that parable so much, of like the farmer, like we'll see.
Yeah, like what Jess said, tragedy and awe. Yeah. I was thinking terror, because that's what tragedy invokes, right? Terror and awe. And how often in the Bible is that awe translated as fear?
Yeah.
Because it contains all that at the same time, right? You have this terror and you have awe. And I get this image of, the fairy tale where, the person in the story has to enter the deep, dark woods. There's always the deep, dark woods.
Right.
Yeah. What
they
is that?
go in and they battle all their whatevers, their demons or actual monsters or whatever. And then they come out on the other side and they're transformed. And that's the pattern. That's the good pattern of a fairy tale, right? Where they don't go into the deep, dark woods and die. Hansel and Gretel go into the deep, dark woods and they almost die, but then they kill the witch and they're reunited with their family and everything's, wonderful. And they're transformed. Now they're smarter, they're stronger, they're more courageous. They're all those things, right? And so we know that going into the deep, dark woods is a good thing.
Yeah.
Right. But who wants to call it that?
Yeah. Right. Well,
they want to call it evil.
The cave you fear to enter holds the answer that you seek, Joseph Campbell or whatever. I just want to read this because it came to mind and I think it's all about this, but it's Hebrews 12. Okay. So, for you have not come to a mountain that can be touched, and to a blazing fire, and to darkness and gloom and whirlwind, and to the blast of a trumpet, and the sounds of words which sound was such that those who heard begged that no further word be spoken to them. For they could not bear the command, if even a beast touches the mountain, it will be stoned. And so terrible was the sight that Moses said, I am full of fear and trembling. But you have come to Mount Zion and the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to myriads of angels, to the general assembly and church of the firstborn who are enrolled in heaven, and to God, the judge of all, and to the spirits of the righteous made perfect, and to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood, which speaks better than the blood of Abel.
Wow.
That passage,
in that context, that's amazing. I have to read it.
I mean, that just reminded me of what the fear and the awe and the trembling, because that's what it is. I mean, if you think about any biblical reference of even these, of which it always is, I would argue, mediated experiences of God. It's what it is. It's terrifying,
Yeah, and I also would like to reiterate that I think, and I feel kind of stupid saying this, but it just recently became really clear for me that this is what the Bible is about. It's about the contention between good and evil, because the story in Genesis is centered around a tree of the knowledge of good and evil, right? Which is it's the dividing asunder. I don't know. I never looked it up. I should have looked it up. But the story of Solomon when he judged which infant belonged to the mother, right? Remember the mother? One mother stole another mother's baby, and they both claimed it. And he said, "Well, I'm gonna divide it asunder." Right. And then the truth came out. And I think for some reason, I just have a feeling that there's something in there about this idea of judgment, because that's what we do. We divide the thing asunder. Right. And that is actually diabolos, to cast apart. That is what judgment is doing. It's taking this and saying, and this, and saying, this is good, and putting it here, and this is bad, and putting it over there, right? It divides things apart. And in that, what you just read, it says right in there, God is the judge of all. Yeah. Right. And it says that for a reason. He's the one who's going to, if necessary, cast these apart, but cast them apart in a way that, how do I say this? Like he did with the creation story, in a sense. He drew out of the chaos, right? He pulled the day out of the chaos. He pulled the night out of the chaos. So it wasn't, he didn't separate in the sense that we think of it in a like you go to your room, that kind of separation. It was a separation, like the multiplicity. Oh, I'm going to have a hard time saying this. It was a drawing out of the multiplicity, out of the unity for the benefit of the creature.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
It's all in the service of being.
Right.
Like that's the creative act. Like if he didn't separate things, there would not be anything separate from him. But because of the separation, there could actually be something else.
And there would be nowhere to live.
Right.
Right. And he put his breath of life into Adam. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So when God judges, his judgment, to me anyway, is not like a divisive kind of judgment. It's not a casting apart, but a drawing out of the chaos, right? Mm-hmm. And of course, Christ's parable of the wheat and the tares. Just let them grow up, man. Don't try and separate them out, because you're going to ruin the good if you pull out the bad, right? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, when you start thinking about this, then suddenly, and even the parable of the sower, like Jesus doesn't seem to think it's a big deal if some of the seed falls on rocky ground and never sprouts. It's not a big deal to him. We would go, oh, that's bad, and here's the Chinese farmer story, right? Where everybody's like, oh, that's good. And then the farmer says, well, maybe, and then something else happens. And then they all, oh, that's bad. And he goes, well, maybe. And, and the story, this reality, this existence that we have, this life, right, is dynamic. And I really I'll be bold enough to say that I really don't think that we have, to judge is to be God. That's what it is. Right. That's what Satan said. You'll be like God. Okay. If you can learn to do this.
Knowing good and evil, and not in like an abstract, I think way, but knowing it in reality.
Exactly. And so I don't think that we're good at it. We're not God. Right?
Yeah, this is why, right? This is why the saints are silent, right? Or even if you look at Dostoevsky or like Father Zosima or something, like he's not going around telling everybody like who's right and who's wrong.
Right.
That's not what he's falling on his face saying, everyone forgive me.
Lord have mercy.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
go ahead.
Well, and I like we were talking about Diabolus is what cast apart. But like that integration is a healing process. And so right. Like there's ways in which we're divided that when things come together in us, we actually sense it as healing. It actually is healing. And it, there's something about the human person that is able to hold things together within ourselves and to take those multiplicities and see them as unities, and then those are actually like somehow manifest in us. Like it's almost like our co-creative capability to do that in creation. Mm. And yeah, but I'm thinking about this frame thing, and there's a way in which you can recognize how you see things through a frame, but this idea that you can never kind of peer outside your frame, like you couldn't come to the edge and kind of like cut through it, or nothing on the outside ever like breaks in through to you. Mm-hmm. It seems to me like it's it's sort of a fatalistic notion that
It's trapped. You're
Well,
trapped.
you literally are trapped.
This is why I say, like, you can't think yourself out of a prison made of thought. That's the
Right.
accurate postmodern critique, and what Kant was talking about, I think, is because what you're saying, like the frame problem, this is why I said to Paul, the frame problem is only a problem if you're not present. And then he replied, like, well, you come back to a room and you're present in the room, but I said, yeah, but if you're in the room, then you're present. The only way you're not present in the room is if you're cutting yourself off from the room and looking down and like going into yourself in a closed off way, and you're stuck in the prison of all your ideas and articulations.
Mhm.
But the reality is, this gets into the non-dualism, is the reality is none, we are and we are not there, because anytime you're participating in being, this reality of the coincidence of opposites and the inarticulable is happening all the time, because that's what you're interacting with. Is like the mystical reality that's beyond your comprehension. Like, what the hell do you think you're interacting with?
Yeah.
Well, this is where Piranesi comes in, right? Because in Piranesi, if nobody's read the book, there's a house. Is it a house? I guess
It's a house.
Yeah. But it's like massive, like it's huge, filled with rooms.
Miles and miles of house.
Yeah. Some of the rooms are crumbling and falling apart. And a lot of the space hasn't yet been explored by Piranesi, and he lives in this house. And he lives a very meager existence, actually. He's wearing rags and he's eating raw fish and,
And
climbing up statues to get out of tidal, tsunamis and all this stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he's not afraid. He's never afraid.
Right.
And he sees the house as a unity. It's a house that it's benevolent and it's kind. Those are his words to describe the house. And so it is one giant thing, but it's filled with rooms. And all the rooms are filled with statues. And those statues are people and animals and, and every room there's something about the room, like there'll be a room where he goes and fishes, and there'll be a room where all the seagulls nest, and there'll be a room where whatever. I can't remember all the details. And he explores those rooms. But there's always a sense in Piranesi that they are parts of a whole, that they are never just in and of themselves anything, right? That they belong to the house, and that the house loves him, and he responds with love for the house.
Yeah.
Even though he's not being treated very well in there. I mean, from all appearances,
He doesn't even know that.
He could have something to complain about
it either.
Right.
Yeah, he has no clue that he's not being treated well, right?
Yeah, because he thinks his clothes, his rags of moss, like he thinks it's great. He doesn't think he's hungry.
Yeah.
He's loving his life.
Yeah. And, I don't know what you think. Maybe you can help me with this, Luke, because I'm just thinking, that guy, I can't remember his name anymore, that visits him, the other. He's not interested in the house. He's interested in the rooms because he's looking for something that he wants to possess. Okay. And he's sending Piranesi out because he doesn't want to get lost in the house, and Piranesi knows it and is comfortable there. And every now and then he brings Piranesi something beneficial, like a pair of shoes or a sleeping bag or some crackers or whatever, but he's not very generous. Right? And I'm just wondering how that maps onto what we're talking about here, because I think it does. It's just interesting because he's really focused on the rooms, this guy. He doesn't see the house as a living, breathing organism at all, that has a capability to undergird someone, right?
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's like he thinks that he fears the house in some way. Like he thinks it's basically dangerous. So he sends Piranesi out because Piranesi is expendable in his eyes. He also knows that there's something valuable out there he's trying to, capture or get for himself. So there's this like, and he misses, well, there's a way in which Piranesi's love and trust of the house, he knows the house looks on him with love, and he looks on love toward the house. And this gets into like, it's, so much of our religious stuff is trying to get our own viewpoints correct our frames, we'll say. We're always trying to correct our frames to get a more accurate frame. Like, who is God? It's better to believe God is good than if he's not, this kind of thing. And for me, it's kind of missing. The larger question is, how does God see you? And what?
Wow, that's really good, Jess.
And what frame does God see you in? Like what? How does God frame you? And
is this knowing as you were fully known? That's always been, 1 Corinthians 8, like that's knowledge puffs up, but love edifies, and if you think you know, you do not yet know as you ought to know. But the goal is to know as you are fully known.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
And a lot of times we will believe that God is good, not because of any goodness that we necessarily have been convinced of, but because he's judgmental. And it would be better to believe he's good than not because of his judgment.
We see God as,
or his sovereignty, or his, put a name on it. You can be like, well, God is all powerful, so I've got to believe that he's all good, or else he's gonna squash me like a bug. But already in there is the whole assumption of how God sees you.
That's kind of like, that reminds me of my dream of the house, where as long as I act like I'm not afraid of the house, and I I'm like, no, happy day.
Yeah.
Then the house won't trap me in it. Right.
Yeah.
But as soon as I have this weird awareness that the house is actually, looming and watching, and I become terrified, and then it traps me in it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I think that's exactly it.
Yeah.
And I think that's what happens. That's the fear. In very broad strokes, I would say that's the fear that stems from a lack of faith in this ineffable goodness. That, I wouldn't even reduce that to like what you would even conceive of as goodness, because what the hell do you know?
Right.
And so, but like that fear is the thing that then closes you in on yourself, and you're stuck. You're trapped. You can't interact with the world anymore. This is what I think Barfield is talking about. This is when you don't save the appearances. This is when your ideas become idolatry, because they trap you.
Yeah.
And part of this getting to that point is you almost have to go to the end of your own frame. And so you have to take whatever viewpoint you have, and you have to go all the way to the end. And it's only when you get to the edge of your frame and you peer out, and sometimes those things come crashing down on you. Sometimes it's not something you go and seek. But if you are to seek it, I think you basically have to just go all the way, like whatever you're doing.
That's why I said that's why I made that point, that there are people that won't wander into the landscape of pain and suffering, right? That's right. That inability to go to the edge of their frame. And
voluntarily, but eventually I think they'll get there. And this would bring in like what I think of as Nate and Sam are going to talk about this, I think, in Tradition and Apocalypse, but like the ideal polar bears or the ideal Christ or the ideal white stone you. Like that is the thing I think that is at the end of the U-shaped journey, and it's unavoidable. This gets into like what we were talking about the other day with whether you are someone who just like gives in to a libertine, licentious lifestyle, or you are the religious, pious rule follower. Like it doesn't necessarily matter, because you can, like, whether or not you want to stick in your frames and just insist on that, insist on your own way, insist on your own understanding, eventually, like, you will get to the point of, and this is like the transcendent pragmatism that I would call just like Christian wisdom. It either works or it doesn't work. And so like either the transcendent imposes itself on you in tragedy and it forces a change,
or awe and wonder.
Right. Or you naturally follow to the end, right, of whatever you're doing, like the prodigal or like the older brother, because both were off.
Yeah,
but it
both
doesn't
didn't
matter.
understand. Yeah.
I mean, you're gonna get there. I mean, this is like, Jess, you said that before, and I love it. Like, you're gonna get there because where else? Like, there isn't anywhere else to go.
Yeah, God's everywhere. He's he's at the highest heights in the depths of Sheol, and even, where can I go to hide from him? There's nowhere you can go. What people do is the only thing you can do to hide from God is basically this move, is where you lower your head and you don't look around anymore.
But even that, like, eventually you're gonna die, and guess who's right in the middle of that?
Right. Right.
This is where the Christian story, I think, I mean, and like, this is where, like, when I talk about anything, I'm talking about everything. Because like I was talking to Joey the other day, and we were trying to bring in perennialism, because that was initially what I was thinking about talking about, was like perennialism and non-duality. And Joey was just like, when you talk about perennialism, do you essentially mean, like, is that what you mean by universalism? And I'm like, well, or non-duality. And I'm like, yeah, kind of. It's just all the same thing.
It's the unity of everything.
Yeah, it's just, they're like just different. It's like slightly different takes. It's just like a different word.
Yeah.
Like, what's behind that word is all the same thing.
Yeah. And my whole thing is, like, I don't know how, like, because I'll see this, and like I've seen it in my own life, and I can tell the stories, and I don't know how to make other people see it. And it, like,
because I think the first question they're going to ask, even watching this conversation, they're going to say, well, how do I act then? How do I act in the world if I can't tell what's right?
What do I do? But almost that's like, that's a smuggled judgment, right?
Sort of. I mean, it's a legitimate question. I mean, if I want to be fair, it's a legitimate question, right? And this is why we have multiplicity, I think. Like, this is why, duality is not, it's a part of our existence.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. And God created us in the environment where we need the particular, right? We need the multiplicity. But I think that the key is to, well, like you said yesterday, keep your mouth shut and just, right? Love. How did you put that? Keep your mouth shut and love everyone. Something like that.
Well, and love your enemies. Yeah.
Well, see, when you said that, it dawned on me, because I had that scene of Christ standing before Pilate, where, Pilate's like, are you going to judge this? Are you going to say these people are wrong and you're right? Right? That's essentially what he's asking. And Jesus kept his mouth shut. Okay. He didn't judge it.
Yeah.
And then Pilate said to him, behold the human being. And I think this is really important, because this is the humanity of Christ, in the proper orientation, right? That is not separating the wheat from the tares. That is not calling what's obviously wrong. He could have. Like, a lot of people are like, why didn't he defend himself? He had every right to, right?
But what's so crazy is, like, we've talked about this too, like the crucifixion, the passion of Christ. yeah, it's obviously wrong. And it's also the best thing that's ever happened in the history of the world.
And the worst thing.
Yes, it's both.
Right, which is that coincidence of opposites,
Yeah.
right? Which is that tension that gets that this is where you transcend, okay? Right here. And I think this is how you can act with what you know. So you have these particularities, you have this multiplicity. You can say the crucifixion was bad because look at the horror of it, but you can also say it was good. And people want to call that a paradox. And just with, when they say paradox, they're actually, what they're doing is they're putting the thing in the broom closet and closing the door. Okay. But what do you do with that paradox? Well, that, to me, that's the crystal sea. That's where everything becomes solidified and unified. All the evil and all the good, right? It all comes together and you can stand on it and you can walk on water. Okay. Yeah. Literally.
Yeah.
And that's how I think one needs to use this understanding to deal with the problem of duality and multiplicity and pain and suffering and a good, benevolent God. Because you do have those two things. You have pain and suffering, and you have a good God. And that's why Sam Harris can make a case. Okay.
Yeah, Ivan, that was when you were talking about
yeah.
all the Ivan stuff.
Yeah, well, Ivan's better than Sam Harris.
Right.
He's even more dogmatic because he believes in God. Sam Harris just says, well, because of this, I can't believe in this. But Ivan says, I believe in this.
And I reject
but I reject this.
Yeah.
The pain and the suffering. Right. And so I reject God.
Yeah.
And I think that there is, this might sound really, I don't know, naive or silly or childish, but that's all good for me. That just means it's good. But I think the only way to actually transcend, to walk on the water, to allow these things to become the crystal sea for you is when you contemplate them. And that means you have to wander into the landscape. Okay. You got to go to the places that you don't want to go to. You got to want to know what you don't want to know. Right. And then you'll see how, like Jess talked about healing, right? Well, what is healing? You have a cut in your skin and suddenly you have two opposites. Mm-hmm. Okay. You have things that oppose each other. They stand against, right? And what happens with healing? They knit themselves together. And I think that's what this is. That's what God is doing. He's given us this world of multiplicity, this world of duality for us to contemplate, right? The images of war, the images of clear-cut logging, the images of children being brutally raped and murdered. He's given us all those images. And then the beautiful things, the sunset, the Grand Canyon, the ancient tree growing on the side of a cliff. Mm-hmm. And he wants us to knit them together. That's what he wants us to do, I believe, because it's then that we transcend. But as soon as we focus on the particular, we sink into the duality. We sink into the multiplicity. We sink into the sea like Peter did.
Yeah, there's a way in which, like, when you go into the duality, you want to choose one side or the other. And people, you'll choose the good or the bad, depending on what you think is going to save you or the most powerful or whatever desire is in your heart. But there's a way in which Christ brings those two together within himself. So on the cross, he holds together both all the evil and all the good and all the world together. And I think that's what we're meant to do, is we're meant to hold the dualities together. We're meant to basically hold the world together. And this is to see the unity in everything, to witness it, and then also to be able to say that it is good. Like that's the, look on all of creation as God did and say, this is good.
Right.
What's happening. And, it's not simple. But I don't think we,
going back quickly, Jess, to that image of God saying this is good. Before he said this is good, he said, let there be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. And this is that being a good thing, right?
Yep.
Let there be, and it is good. And that is really the essence of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
I think being is good.
Yep.
And this is why when I talked about Ivan yesterday, I was saying what Ivan was saying with his speech when he rejects God is he's actually rejecting his own existence, because what he's saying is being is not good. That's what he's saying.
Mm-hmm.
And, and then Mary reiterates it when she says, let it be unto me. Right. And we can look at what Mary's situation was and we could say, well, that's not good.
Right.
Right. But Mary said being is good. Let it be unto me. Right.
Mm-hmm.
She agreed with God that being was good.
Yep.
What I was thinking about earlier is, and I don't know, this is definitely too big of a question for me, and maybe this is too afield. It's related, but so then what does the kingdom of God look like, or the parousia, the reconciliation of all things, when we as saints or the church or the bride of Christ mend the division and reunify the things? What does reunification look like? Because if being entails duality and division and night and day and differences, what does there, and somehow there that can be, so being is good, but somehow that division can there's a way that it operates that can be not good. The
Sure.
Division is not good. So then what does the reconciliate, and somehow this is connected to a thing I've been contemplating, and I don't even know what it means, but it's something that, like, to me, the kingdom of God is when all of creation gets to the place of let it be, when we all stop trying to control things and we say, like, being is good, creation is good, God is good, and we stop trying to conform everything to our image and to our judgments and the way that we think it should be. And then simultaneously, and I know this makes no sense, but simultaneously nothing changes and everything changes.
Well, see, this is right. Yeah, Luke, this is the new heaven and the new earth. Okay. So you have this teleological new heaven and new earth, the destruction of all things, but it's fractal, right? When you reconcile things, multiplicities, particulars, when you bring them together in your own life, in your mind, let's say, suddenly you're living in a new heaven and a new earth, right? Nothing is the same anymore, right?
And yet everything is.
Yeah. And this is what reconciliation does, right? Reconciliation creates new heavens and new earths every single day. It does that.
So is that it then? That, like, it's the evolution of consciousness, and our consciousness now is such that it sees the world as
divided.
And when we get to the place of let it be, the world will cease to be divided.
If everyone does, yeah.
And that's final participation.
I think so. And it sounds really simple, but how hard is it? Like, just think about that task.
Right. It's exactly like walking on water. This is what I was thinking. In order to walk on water, you can't even be thinking about this. Like I watched last week for family movie night, I watched The Last Samurai with the kids. And I love Japan movie, samurais and stuff. And it's a little violent, but don't judge me. Don't judge me. Listen. And my wife was working, so it was just my choice. And there's a point in it where he's learning to sword fight, because the samurai are bad, right? And they're the ones that he's fighting against, and he's hired as this American to go fight against them after he's killed all the Indians, and he's drinking himself to death because
this guy
himself. He's going to train, and he gets kidnapped essentially by the samurai, but then he's living with them, and he starts learning to love them, and he's learning to fight with these wooden swords. And something that they say is he's fighting and he can't ever beat this guy and can't do well. And then they just keep saying, no mind. And it's essentially like, get out of your head. Like you're thinking about it. And when you're thinking about it, you can't do it. Like you can't react. It's like riding a bike. It's like playing. It's like doing any skill. When you're in your head, this is Polanyi, right? Subsidiary focal integration. When you're focusing on it, you can't actually do it. You can't play. Yep. You can't sword fight, whatever. No mind. But that's also the walking on the water, right? If you're sitting there thinking like chaos, water, like I sink in that, like you can't do it. You won't be able to do it. So then I was thinking earlier when we were talking, I was like, can I even imagine? Like existentially imagine. Theoretically, I can imagine. But like existentially, can I imagine stepping out of a boat onto water and having no thought of sinking? Like, I don't think I can.
No, I can't either. I would be dishonest to say that I could do that.
Right. Right. And it's unfathomable to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think that's what it takes.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's a trip.
Yeah, but that's like being caught in your frame or being present, what you're talking about.
That's the frame problem.
Yeah, the problem is being aware of your frame and
you're stuck in your head. Like that's the thing. It's a little bit like Piranesi, and that's another reason I like Piranesi so much, or like the Green Lady, but not quite, because the Green Lady and Pearlanda is a little different. But like she wouldn't even. This is why she was such a confusion and so confusing to Ransom constantly. Is like all the stuff that he normally was thinking. In his fallen self, his inwardness, his looking down, his analytics.
Fallen.
Right. All of that she just had no experience with. So that she was just like, why would you think that way? And like she just couldn't understand. And then he'd walk her through it. And that's what the whole book is about, which is why I love it so much, is this dance of like an unfallen consciousness that could really go either way. Like it could go the way of mankind, or it could not. And like that's what that whole book and all the dialogues are about, that because she's just like she's in total harmony with the world, and the animals just come with her and carry her around.
Letting it be.
Yeah, exactly.
She's letting it be, right? And we say fallen, but we don't think about what that means. We think we fell from a throne. We think we were kings and queens, and now we're peasants wearing filthy rags, right? And no, we fell into the multiplicity. We sunk down into our frame, if you want to put it that way. We stopped looking up. We fell, right? Down. And, there was something else I wanted to say. Anyway, I forgot. I mean, that's what Peter did on the water. He fell into the water, right? And that's what I was going to say. People say, well, you just have to keep your eyes on Christ.
Yep.
It's so annoying to me. Because what are you looking at?
Right.
What is Christ? That's my question. What is Christ? What are you looking at?
they're saying that almost still within a frame problem, because they're just like, you just have to be thinking about that.
Just look at the Jesus doll.
Or you just have to will it enough. It's like, or something.
Yeah. You just gotta focus on the little Jesus man there, you know?
Yeah.
Sorry, Jess.
The magic trick.
No, but that's another whole part of it is like, we think this is all something to do with our will. Like we'll will this and correct it, and we can manipulate it and do it. But it has more to do with the heart, because if the heart has if the heart has a reason, there's nothing to stop it.
Well, I think when you're looking at Christ, you're looking at the Tao.
Yep.
If you want to put it in those terms, you're looking at the let it be.
Mm-hmm.
You're looking at the reconciliation of the coincidence of opposites, right? You're looking at the unity and the multiplicity. You're looking at all of it. You're looking at the perfect human being who did not judge. That's what you're looking at.
Nobody will, Shari. He's going to come back with a sword. He's going to judge. That's what it is. You haven't listened Jordan Peterson 2.0.
Right.
Jordan Peterson 2.0.
No, it's not 2.0. That's what I meant. That's the Jordan Peterson 200 level classes.
Right. And I'm not minimizing Christ to a philosophy, okay? Like, that's not what I'm doing. I'm not saying Christ is the Tao, but the Tao is Christ, right? Because God is everywhere present, filling all things. So,
C.S. Lewis wrote a book on it too, if that triggers people.
Yeah, and that's why I'm not going to call it bad or wrong, okay?
I always, I anticipate, because I know this culture and I came out of it, kind of what I would call like the dualistic, analytical, deistic Christianity that's in this mode of judgment and choosing all the time. Like I hear in my consciousness Congress all the retorts of like when we're saying different things, and but like, to me, that's the problem. That spirit, the spirit that has the immediate impulse to come in and like want to start making
divisions
and judgments and analyzing, that analytical impulse is I don't know. That's what I was talking about with Chad this morning after I watched his video. Is I just said and that to me is the frame problem, is to be stuck in that world, that prison made of thoughts and all that analysis. It actually means that you can't actually listen to anyone, because you're constantly analyzing it. You're reducing it to what you know, rather than wanting to open up to the thing that you don't know. The thing that is outside in your periphery. It's the looking up. Like, you have to look up. If you're looking down all the time and analyzing, like, you're stuck in that world.
Right. My dad was visiting my parents yesterday, and my dad said to me that the church that he's been preaching at has grown because some Baptist pastor refused to stay closed during the COVID mandates. And so half of his congregation left. And I said, oh, that's interesting. And he said, no, that's bad. He shouldn't have done that. He lost all those members. And I said, well, maybe that's good. Right?
Right.
Who the hell knows?
Who knows? Who knows?
Right.
Yeah.
And that's where, like, it's great. And I guess I would say for myself, it's the judgment and the analysis is fine. Like, this is where one of the passages I was going to read earlier is from 1 Corinthians that I love to. It's 1 Corinthians 11. And Paul is talking to him about, divisions that are going on with him. And he's saying, he's talking about their, eating at communion and all this is happening and they're not doing it right. And he says, but in giving you this instruction, I do not praise you, because when you come together, it's not for the better, but for the worse. For in the first place, when you come together as a church, I hear that divisions exist among you, and in part I believe it. for there must also be factions among you, so that those who are approved may become evident among you. But the words, the Greek words translated division and faction, are different. And so to me, the way that I've always taken that is kind of what we're talking about. It's the difference between judgment and opinion, is that Paul's saying, like, of course you must have opinions. Like, everybody's going to have opinions. Like, that's how different people have different opinions, and that's how you see what's evident, and you have conversation.
Yeah, I mean,
but like, there shouldn't be factions. It should never divide you. If your opinions divide you, then like you've missed the whole point. Like, that's not what it's supposed to do. Of course you're going to have opinions.
Yeah, this okay, I want to just make a mental note so I don't forget. Cheese. Yeah, cheese and condemnation.
Cheese and condemnation.
Cheese and condemnation. Got it. Bookmark it.
This is why Jesus says he has not come to bring condemnation. He doesn't reject, right? Like, this is the problem I have with cancel culture, for example.
Right.
Yeah. Because when you reject a person, you cut them off from the ability to transform you and them.
Yeah.
Right? You separate them off and they shrivel up and die, and so do you, actually, because you don't have that ability to interact with them. Right?
But what do you do with heretics, Shari?
Burn them at the stake.
I'm just letting my consciousness Congress out.
Right.
The Bible says.
What's a heretic? I got a whole opinion on that too. But because in my opinion, we're all heretics. We don't know the essence of God, and any attempt to express it is heresy. Woo! Because we really don't know.
Bookmark that.
Bookmark that.
Back to the cheese.
Easy.
When you were reading that portion of Paul there, I thought of making cheese.
Perfect. I love it.
Right? You put the rennet into this solid mass of milk. You drop the rennet in, and it just separates.
It's
right?
amazing. Yeah, I just saw that happen.
Yeah, and it doesn't diminish anything, actually, because everything has a purpose. The curds for the cheese rise to the surface, and you can scoop them off, and you can make cheese.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got your whey,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you can make all kinds of things with your whey.
Yeah.
It hasn't diminished anything. Everything's
Which
still
is better, the milk or the cheese, Shari?
We need to know. Are you?
You couldn't have the cheese without the milk, Luke. So there you go. But that's what I thought of when you were reading that passage. I'm like, that's like making cheese.
I love you. You should write. A good idea for the book that everybody tells you to write that you haven't written, that you will write someday probably, you could just be like farm theology.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Goats and the sheep.
Yeah. Curds in the way.
Curds
The tares in the wheat. The left and the right. There it is. It's all in there.
It's all part of the farm. The unity of everything.
It is. Have we done it? How long have we been going? We don't want to.
Like an hour and a bit.
An hour and a bit, yeah.
That's
I
probably
think we're good. I was going to ask you, Jess, I don't know if you can do it or not, but can you edit in that Chinese farmer story to the beginning of this video?
Yeah. We can do whatever we want.
Hell yeah. Can you edit like me, but like make me hotter?
Yeah.
Just put a big Orthodox beard on, Luke. That would look awesome.
It'll just take off your mustache.
Just a razor, just edit in a razor coming in.
Yeah, it'll actually be shaving you during the video. So like a Disney magical razor, like doo-doo-doo.
I was just going to say that mustache is growing on me, but it's actually not. It's growing on you.
Growing on me.
Talk about something that needs to get cut off. Thrown into the fire. What's that mullet thing going on?
yeah. No, this was good.
Yeah.
Always fun. So no
Man.
judgment.
No judgment, no.
Don't judge us. How many judgy comments are we gonna get?
Oh, this will be the most judged. Yeah, I want to tackle sometimes just like, I don't know, the whole thing and that you brought up about, I can't remember names anymore. Ilyosha and Ivan and
oh yeah, that would be a fun conversation actually.
Because that's so intense.
Very.
And then how to work in, because if it all has to do with being and somehow, I don't know, like it, because he makes the argument that it's better for that little girl not to ever have been than to have gone through that. And I think the counter argument is it's better that she is, that she got to be. And I don't know, that would be an intense conversation.
That one we could bring in too, because it's something I've talked about a little with Cal, but I think it would be an interesting connection with that. But like the son of perdition, it would have been better if he were never born. No?
Yeah, that too.
And Job.
And Job talks about
of course,
not
Job.
wanting to be born.
Job's everything. Just say it.
Job is everything. Job is
is
everything. And I don't understand how it's in the Bible and then no one knows anything about it.
Yeah. That's because it's like God. It's everything, so they made it nothing.
Well, and Shari, you said before, it's like if people don't understand it, they're just like, well, it's just kind of complicated and God's in charge. And
yeah. Yeah, that's when you lift the rug and you just go.
Oh my gosh. Shari, also, you gotta watch Tree of Life.
I know.
Oh, I need to watch that too.
Yeah.
Have you not seen it, Jess?
No, you know what? In Tarek, what's the movie? Thin Red Line. There's that one, the main character soldier, he doesn't judge anything. I should have brought
that's a huge Malik thing. I mean, that's a hidden life too.
Yeah, because he is
throw down your hypothesis for Franz Jägerstätter.
For what?
Luke has a hypothesis about Franz Jägerstätter in A Hidden Life that I think is absolutely true.
He didn't judge the Nazis?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and what's interesting go ahead.
Well, the reason I can resonate with that, because when he has that interaction with that older Nazi guy at the prison, he's actually loving him by not judging him.
Mm-hmm.
And you know it because the man sits in his chair. He wants to rest in that, in the place where he sat, where Franz sat, because it was like Pilate, when Pilate said "Ecce homo."
Mm-hmm.
He was being the true human being, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's almost like that bringing together of opposites is like it's that concentration without effort. It's the work.
Yeah.
That it's play, because you don't have to. You can just let things fall, and even though it may suck, you don't have to. But the one thing interesting about a guy in the Thin Red Line, so at the beginning, like he's like with the Islanders. He's like just chilling out with another soldier buddy of his. They've like gone AWOL from their division, and they're just like lounging around, eating and drinking and hanging out with the local Islander people who live primitive. And he's just talking about the unity of all things. Then the MPs come and get him and they haul him back, and then they go and do this sort of ground invasion or whatever. And there's this interesting part where he talks about, he's like, these are my people. He's like, talking about the other soldiers. He's like, these are my people. This is where I belong. And like just after he was out, like with the people on the island who were just like talking about the oneness of everything. And then he talks about how those guys were his people. And then like at the very end, he gives his life for them by I forget exactly how it happens, but the Japanese ambush is kind of sneaking in from behind, and he's the only one that spots it. And so he actually ends up dying, warning everyone of that. And I'm just like, he could have made a judgment against the other soldiers and been like, you idiots, you don't understand the oneness of everything. I saw it with the Islanders or whatever. He never did that. He was
present wherever he was.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. He was also Jim Caviezel, wasn't he? The guy that played Jesus in the
Oh, he was. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. For sure. It's a very, I don't know. I feel like, and you start to see it just kind of everywhere. It's like the prodigal son when he comes back.
Well,
there's no words of judgment. It's not like, what the hell were you doing?
Yeah. And I mean, just that example that Jess is giving there, he was all things to all men.
Yeah.
Right? Paul talks about this.
Yeah.
And like, I've often wondered what it would be like to have lived, in the crowds when Jesus was walking around. You got this religious mindset and, of the Jews. And then you've got this pagan culture, right? There's a mix of all kinds of things going on and other forms of Judaism. The Samaritans, you got all these people, but they all have a frame. Okay. They all have a way of perceiving the world. And then along comes Jesus and he's just darting in and out of everyone's frames. Right? Hanging out with
Jesus is the frame problem.
Talking to the tax
Jesus is
collector.
the frame problem.
Yeah. Yes. And we think we can look back on that and say, oh, isn't that lovely? He loved everybody. Right? But what would we have thought of that at the time? Because I hear that kind of language now. I hear the charlatan language about people. I hear how it's not necessarily good to be all things to all men, right? And so would we have, I think we would have thought of Jesus in the same terms, honestly, if that's the way we want to move around in the world, okay? If we want to make all those judgments, Jesus is going to break all the frames, okay? He's going to smash all the frames because what he's doing is reconciling, right? He's knitting things together.
Right.
And nobody's going to like that. Nobody is going to like that.
Yeah.
It's no wonder he was crucified.
Well, and even Peter, when Jesus said, I'm going to go and I'm going to get crucified, and Peter says, no, far be it from you, Lord. And then that's when
bad.
That's bad.
Yeah. And that's well, and Peter saying, you don't have to suffer. And Jesus said, get behind me, Satan. My wife was doing like a Bible study about Jesus' temptations, and part of the Bible study, which was really good, was talking about how in a way Satan didn't want Christ to suffer. He's like, hey, you're hungry, turn these stones into bread. You don't have to go and die on the cross. Just bow down and worship me, and the nations are yours. Like he was trying to make it really easy. And I don't know. There's something in that. There
is something in that. Actually, I'll give you a little teaser trailer for tomorrow. No, not that kind of teaser.
Oh goodness, we don't need that teaser, Luke. Luke's in his tidy whities, like, damn. What kind of video is this?
I'm laughing embarrassedly. No, we're going to talk about something in the meditations on the tarot tomorrow that you're going to have to watch that conversation, because
okay.
interesting. And yeah, I've thought about that too, when in the context of what we're talking about with judgment, because like Luke said, Peter's calling what Jesus is going to do bad, right?
Yeah.
And so he's casting apart what Christ is doing as a whole.
Yeah.
He's trying to separate it up into little bits. There's a good part and a bad part, and we'll do all the good things. We'll leave out all the bad stuff. Right. And that's when Jesus calls him Satan, when he starts casting things apart, right? And parsing it up. It's like my niece said to my sister once. She lied. She was a little kid. And my sister said, "Are you lying to me?" She said, "No, I'm just telling you the nice truth."
The nice truth.
That's funny. It's a good line.
Yeah.
Did you guys watch Peterson's video on perception? It just came out a couple days ago.
That's probably what Chad clipped in his video.
Yeah, it was so freaking good.
Yeah,
but he gets to the end, and there's something, I don't know, there's something about the end that he doesn't quite nail it, and I don't know what it is. He's like all the way there, and then he goes and he says what he thinks, but I feel like everything's kind of building, and it's like,
what does he say? I mean,
well, he's a little bit too mystical, where he just sort of is like,
wait a minute, does not compute.
No, but it's like he I don't know. It'll take me a minute to describe, but he was like talking about perception, the problem of perception, like how do we perceive things and how do the meanings come to us? And then describing basically the FOMO, not the FOMO, the nasty postmodernists,
no,
the mofo pomos, not the honest pomos. They want to say that basically it's just an imposition of will. That's how perception is made. And so if we just will something different, we can perceive something different. We can perceive everything different. And then he tells a story about, and it basically just gets down to like the spirit of Christ is how you perceive things. That's what he ends up saying. And I'm just like, what does that mean?
Yeah. It's my question.
Well, that's, I mean, essentially, from my understanding, that would be what the early church father said, like starting in Just Martyr and then riffed on with, I think Maximus that's the logi, the logoi, the logos seeds. They are the unity, the mystical unity that holds everything together. They are the unity in everything that makes a thing a thing rather than the multiplicity.
Yep.
And so in that sense, like
brings the multiplicities together.
So in that sense, everything is Christ. And that gets into like my panentheism is that it is and it isn't. That's kind of the non-dualism. Like that would be my line between panentheism and pantheism. But it's Christ. In him we live and move and have our being, because the Christ is what holds everything together in which being happens.
Right.
So that's the Indra's net.
Yeah, it's that. But that's also how but that is perception. I mean, that gets into Barfield, because that is perception in of itself. Like that is the figurations of the unrepresented, the representations, like that's it. You see the whole, you see the essences. That's what you see. And that's formed in action. That's why you see a sitting place, or you don't see a whole, you see a falling off place. You see the action.
Well, yeah.
You see the unity of it.
Well, and if that's the case, then you can see what is transcendent.
Yes.
Because you can participate in it.
Yes.
Yes.
And then that's what's being present means. And that's but that kicks you out of your frame.
Well, that's because when you're present, you are you are being, okay?
Right.
Being, so you have to, the world has to be, all like, this is the look around, right? This is the look up.
Yeah. Which includes your frame, but it includes this other thing too, which enables you to see beyond. Yeah, it's both.
Yes.
And to only say you can see things through a frame is incorrect.
Right.
No, that's actually not even seeing.
It's not true.
That's just stuck in your thinking.
Right.
Because that's not actually how perception works, which is why I've always liked Barfield, which is why I don't think Paul understands Barfield.
Right.
Because that's what saving the appearances is.
Yes.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. I'm just thinking about, of course, George MacDonald's quote that, the world is man turned inside out. Right. So, and I actually think that a lot of what George MacDonald talks about is what influenced Barfield's thinking about this, as well as Steiner. Right.
For sure.
And so how do you express yourself or even know yourself if you are not aware of, if you are not present in the world, right?
Yeah, because like there's a sense in which you have to trust the transcendent, like I was saying about like how what we think God thinks of us or how we think God sees us. If we see God as someone that basically is judgmental towards us or someone that we should fear for all kinds of reasons, like that'll basically, it's a distrust in that transcendent where we have to understand that the transcendent, though terrifying and overwhelming and awful, full of awe, is fundamentally good.
Right. That's Piranesi.
Right. And so you have to have the trust in the transcendent, but you also have to have the trust in yourself to go beyond your frame, to be able to use that sense within yourself, which is something like your heart, to push you past your own limitations, right? Because if you don't trust yourself, you'll never get out there.
Right.
And also if you don't trust the transcend, like those things for me are like tied directly.
Reciprocity.
Right. It's so if I'm afraid of like myself and I don't trust myself because I've made bad decisions in the past and my heart is corrupt and full of sin and deceit, and which is all true, but you can also say this
17:9, Jess, the heart.
Well, you can also say about everything out in the world. You can say there's all sorts of things to deceive and to kill me and to harm me but there's something else beyond that, and there's something also deeper within me, which is sort of the image of God.
Well, this is Piranesi. Like this is Piranesi, Jess, because the rooms are dangerous. Some of the floors are sloping, the ceilings are falling in. There's huge tidal tsunamis coming in, but Piranesi is held by the house itself, right? Yep. He's geborgen in the security that the house affords him. Okay, he's held by this kind, benevolent house. And every room has its set of dangers, but he lives in complete bliss. Mm-hmm. Literally, he's in bliss because he knows that he's carried. Yeah. Right.
And there's a level to that too, that like, this is why I think the fall, both very big picture, but also existentially is important, through the Douglas Harding phases, because it's like being held by the mother. The baby doesn't ever fear the mother's going to drop them. It's the Geborgen thing, but yet you have to come to the place of self-awareness where you know yourself, the mother, there's a difference there, and then still trust in being held while not just having
what happens, Luke, is the child suddenly develops a fear of falling.
Right.
Okay. When it sees there's a differentiation.
Yes.
Then it becomes fearful that it falls.
Yep.
Harding talks about the sage. And the sage is where the toddler and the experienced elderly person come together. Okay.
Yeah.
And what that is they know that they'll fall, but but they are also geborgen. And that's Piranesi.
Mhm.
That is what Piranesi is. And that's why Piranesi appears childlike in the story,
Yeah.
right? He's oblivious to all the suffering that he's going through. He's happy. He's always happy.
Yeah, I am free, Franz Jägerstätter.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And there's a scene in A Hidden Life. Well, there's actually, he plays on this a lot, I noticed, where Franz is in the prison or at home or whatever, and he's always looking up. He's always looking into the clouds or into the distance.
Yep.
He has this really like huge vista in front of him always. And his wife is always in the dirt. She's grabbing, there's this one scene where she's just grabbing the dirt, you know, or she's digging and she's crying and she's, you know, because she's bound to her multiplicity, right? All the problems that she has because her husband is gone. And he's also been condemned, right, by his fellow villagers. So that puts her in that camp. And so she's dealing with this multiplicity, and he's focused on the unity, right? That I think that's pretty intentional in the film.
Yeah, he sees the goodness that he can't understand, because from an analytical perspective, nothing he's going through is good. And this is where, like earlier, I was going to say this too. This probably gets into like one of our earlier multi-day intense debate / discussions of Abraham and Isaac, and where Nate, I don't know, I think I'm still different than Nate in this regard, is I think Abraham went to sacrifice Isaac, trusting in the goodness of God, legitimately thinking he was going to kill Isaac. And Nate's just like, no.
I think he had to. I think he had to believe that, actually.
Well, I think otherwise there's no point.
Right.
Well, there's something, I don't know if this is necessarily true to the time, but there's something about, like, I bet there was a temple he could have gone to have Isaac sacrificed at. There was human sacrifice going on. There was probably some sort of god that he could have taken Isaac to the temple, had him sacrificed, or he'd done the sacrifice, whatever. But instead he goes to the mountaintop. Why? Because he wants to go see God himself. He doesn't want to go to, he wants to make sure it's the one true God that he's going to go do this for. And this is Abraham taking his frame to the limit. He's going to go all the way. And then it's only there that an angel appears and the ram is in the thicket.
Yeah.
You know, and that's the transcendent breaking through. And like all of a sudden you're in a whole nother world.
The interrupting God. Yeah,
it's the interrupting God. And how do you move from one world to another? You have to go to the edge.
The edge. You got to get to the edge, man.
And then something appears there.
And that's courage and humility. That's the impetus for that.
And
that
people,
is what Christ did, right? Christ had the courage and the humility to stand before Pilate and say nothing. Okay.
Yep.
And what kind of Christ would he have been had he believed that he wasn't really going to have to die? He just had to go through emotions.
Right. Yeah. And for religious people, it's hard because you have to go to the end of your belief system in order to actually reach God.
Yes.
People, you know, there's a way in which God is in the tradition and in the obedience and in the practicing of these things that have been passed down to us. God's in that also. But until you get out of that, it's only hearing. You never get to see God. And you have to find some kind of mountaintop that you're going to meet God at.
And it's a lot of work to get to the top.
Yeah, it's like Abraham hiked for 3 days, and it just probably was terrible. The 3 days and nights, like, how do you even sleep at night knowing what's going to happen in 3 days? Like, it's just going to be like,
maybe didn't.
Yeah, he didn't. And Yeah.
Maybe that's just it. Like, he didn't judge it. He didn't, I can't see that he could judge it. You know, he wasn't going to say that what God was asking him to do was wrong. And he wasn't.
Well, he couldn't absolutize it. This gets into like the opinion thing versus the judgment. Like, he had his thoughts about it, I'm sure. He didn't want to do it. That's why it was a struggle.
He was afraid, you know?
Right.
I mean, I'm afraid to shoot a goat, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Imagine having to kill your own son. Like, of course you're afraid, right? But
you don't want to kill your kid.
I think the only, what was that?
I had to make a kid joke.
You don't want to kill your kid.
I do
want to kill my kids sometimes, yes.
Oh.
Now you just doubled down. That's the right kind of doubling down when it's a double entendre joke.
Like,
yeah. No, actually, what was I going to say? I was going to say something about, the lack of judgment on, I think that's the only way Abraham could have done that in true faith.
Yeah, it's a really good picture of that because it's both of those things. He had his duality opinion. He didn't like it, which is why it was a struggle. Otherwise, he would have just done it without thought and just been like, da-da-da, you know?
Psychopath.
So he had his opinion, but he didn't absolutize it. He didn't elevate like his credo. He didn't lean on his own understanding.
Yeah.
He didn't elevate his map above the transcendent reality, which is faith.
Right. Right.
Or iconic vision, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Good. Well,
We did another part. Let's do a third part. Let's keep going.
Is this a second part of what?
I don't know. We're just like keep recording.
Oh, just within this. Yeah. We
got-
kind of had like a lull. We're like, we're done.
2 hours.
Nope.
We're moving into the 2 hour zone.
Yeah.
So you could do part 1 and part 2. Just kidding.
I'll just edit together the best parts.
No.
All of a sudden, I'm in like a Terrence Malick film, and like I can't even make the cut. I'm just out of it.
It's just me and Shari talking.
They're just like he said to make him look better, and so we just removed him.
We think the best look for you, Luke, is
We tried getting rid of the mustache, and we just decided.
And
we
then
got rid of the mustache, and it just got rid of Luke. There was nothing left after
You started with the eraser, and you were just like, meh.
No, that was all he was. He was just all mustache. And when the mustache left, he disappeared.
Maybe you could do that. Just have a mustache.
Use my mouth. Oh. Dad will maybe make funny clips out of it.
Yeah, we should make this as surreal as possible, and then.
Oh man.
Is this? Are we gonna do randos since randos has been
Yeah, probably.
dying?